Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, I'm bringing you two bone-chilling encounters with one of the Philippines' most feared creatures, the Tikbalang, a demonic horseman hybrid that's been terrorizing travelers and hikers for centuries. But before we dive into these stories, I need to explain what makes the Tikbalang so uniquely terrifying compared to other Asian folklore creatures. This isn't just a ghost or a vengeful spirit. This is something far more physical, far more dangerous, and according to witnesses, far more intelligent. By the end of this video, I'll explain the cultural origins of this creature and why Filipino folklore treats it with such genuine fear and respect. Stick around. These two accounts will change the way you think about hiking alone in the Philippines. Our first story comes from a man I'll call Marco, who was a delivery driver for a logistics company in Quezon City back in 2018. Marco had been doing this job for over a decade, driving through the city at all hours, making deliveries to warehouses on the outskirts where fewer people ventured. He was confident in his routes, knew every street, every shortcut, every back road that would save him time and fuel. But in November 2018, his routine took a terrifying turn. Marco was finishing his last delivery around 11:45 p.m. near the edge of Quezon City, where the urban sprawl began to fade into more rural, undeveloped areas. He'd made this exact route hundreds of times, but on this particular night, something was different. The air felt heavier, the streetlights seemed dimmer, and the usual sounds of the city, distant traffic, barking dogs, people, were completely absent. Before I continue, let me explain the Tikbalang. In Filipino folklore, the Tikbalang is a creature that exists in the liminal spaces of the Philippine countryside. Not quite of the modern world, not quite of the spirit realm. It's typically described as having the head and torso of a man, but the legs, hooves, and lower body of a horse. Some accounts describe it as having enormous bat-like wings, while others claim it's purely a terrestrial creature. The defining characteristic is its size. A tikbalang is enormous, often described as being twice or 3 times the height of a normal man. Its eyes are said to glow red or yellow in the darkness, and it emits a smell of sulfur and decay. The Tikbalang is believed to be a creature born from human sin, specifically, a child cursed at birth or a soul twisted by dark magic. Unlike ghosts, which are incorporeal, or aswang, which are purely vampiric, the Tikbalang is a physical being that can be touched, harmed, and killed. However, it's nearly impossible to harm because of its speed, strength, and supernatural resilience. In Filipino tradition, the Tikbalang is a shapeshifter of sorts. It can appear as a beautiful person to lure travelers off the road, or as a massive demonic horse to terrify them into submission. It feeds on fear, and it's said to be particularly active on nights when the barrier between worlds is thin, during storms, during the full moon, or during particular times in the Filipino calendar when spirits are restless. The creature is territorial. It haunts specific areas, usually ancient forests, old roads, or places where violence or tragedy has occurred. A Tikbalang doesn't just randomly hunt. It guards its domain, and it viciously attacks anyone who trespasses, especially those who show disrespect to the land or its spirits. Marco was driving down a familiar stretch of road when he noticed something odd in his rearview mirror. There was another vehicle behind him, headlights approaching from far back. This wasn't unusual in itself, but the headlights were moving strangely. They seemed to be getting closer and closer, even though Marco was driving at the speed limit. The vehicle behind him was accelerating, but he couldn't see its shape clearly. It was just lights getting nearer. Marco sped up slightly, assuming it was just an impatient driver. but the vehicle behind him matched his speed perfectly. When Marco slowed down, it slowed down. When he sped up, it accelerated again, maintaining the exact same distance, close enough to be threatening, but never quite colliding. This went on for about 3 kilometers. Marco felt his heart rate rising. He considered pulling over to let the vehicle pass, but something told him not to stop. Some instinct screamed at him to keep moving. Finally, he took a sharp right turn onto a side road he knew would eventually loop back to the main highway. He watched his mirror carefully, expecting the vehicle to follow. It didn't. The headlights behind him simply vanished. Marco felt a wave of relief, but also confusion. He'd been so focused on the vehicle that he hadn't realized he'd driven quite far from his intended route. He needed to turn back, but when he looked at his surroundings, something was wrong. The buildings and landmarks he recognized were gone. The road ahead looked unfamiliar, older, more overgrown. The streetlights were fewer and farther between. He'd made this area of the city his second home through years of deliveries. He knew every corner, yet suddenly, nothing looked right. Marco pulled over and checked his GPS on his phone. The blue dot showed him on the same road he'd been driving on for months, but the visual reality didn't match the digital map. The road in front of him, according to his phone, should be lined with small shops and apartment buildings. Instead, he was looking at overgrown vegetation, old concrete walls covered in moss, and structures that looked abandoned and decades old. He got out of his vehicle to get his bearings. The air was cold, colder than it should have been for a November night in Manila. And the smell. There was a smell in the air he couldn't place. It was acrid, caustic, almost like burning rubber mixed with something organic and rotten. It made his stomach turn. That's when he heard it. The sound of hoofbeats. Slow, deliberate, getting closer from somewhere in the darkness ahead. The hoofbeats were loud, not the light clip-clop of a regular horse, but heavy, thundering impacts on the pavement. Marco's first thought was that there was a horse loose in the city. It happened occasionally, especially in the more rural areas where farms existed alongside urban development. He stood by his vehicle, watching the darkness ahead, waiting to see the horse emerge. What emerged was not a horse. At first, all Marco could see were the eyes, glowing red, about 8 feet off the ground, cutting through the darkness like burning coals. The eyes were watching him, studying him. Then, slowly, the creature behind those eyes began to materialize in the dim light of the street lamps. It was impossibly tall. Its upper body was vaguely humanoid, a torso, arms, but the proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, the shoulders too wide. The head was partially human, but the face was elongated, almost horse-like, with a long snout and teeth that reflected the streetlight. And below the torso, where a human's legs should be, there was a massive horse body, muscular, black as midnight, with legs that ended in hooves. The creature must have been at least 12 feet tall, towering over Marco's delivery truck. The smell of sulfur and decay intensified. The creature's breathing was heavy, labored, like it had been running, and it was looking directly at Marco. Marco didn't remember getting back into his truck, but suddenly he was inside, engine running, foot slamming on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tires squealing. In his rearview mirror, he saw the creature, the Tikbalang, rear up on its hind legs. It didn't scream or roar. It made a sound that was worse than either of those things. It was a sound like a horse's whinny mixed with a human's scream of rage, a discordant, impossible sound that seemed to vibrate through Marco's very bones. Marco drove like he'd never driven before. He ran red lights, didn't stop at intersections, just kept his foot on the gas and his eyes on the road ahead. But in his rearview mirror, the creature was following him. It wasn't running. It was moving in a way that defied physics. It would be far behind him one moment, and then suddenly it would be right at his bumper, so close he could hear its hooves striking the pavement. The truck's engine was screaming. Marco's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the wheel. He knew he should call the police, but what would he say? That a demon horse was chasing him through Quezon City? They'd think he was insane. The Tikbalang kept pace with him effortlessly. When the road curved, it cut across the curves, moving through buildings and structures as if they weren't even there. When Marco tried to lose it in narrow streets, it simply appeared ahead of him, forcing him to swerve and change direction. Then Marco made a critical mistake. His truck was nearly out of gas. The fuel gauge was flashing empty. He had to stop. He spotted what looked like a 24-hour convenience store ahead, lights blazing, people visible inside. A safe place. He pulled in desperately, parking near the entrance. He ran inside, gasping, covered in sweat. The store clerk looked at him with concern and asked if he was okay. Marco just nodded, unable to speak, and positioned himself by the window where he could see his truck and the parking lot. For several minutes, nothing happened. The parking lot was empty. The road beyond was quiet. Marco began to breathe more normally. Maybe the creature had given up. Maybe it had been some kind of hallucination, brought on by stress and fatigue. Then he saw it, standing in the darkness at the edge of the parking lot, just beyond the reach of the streetlights. The Tikbalang. It was stock still, watching him through the store windows. Those red eyes locked onto Marco's. And then, very slowly, it took a step forward. The creature was moving toward the store entrance. Marco panicked. He ran to the back of the store, desperately looking for another exit. The store clerk, confused and alarmed, tried to ask him what was happening. Marco didn't answer. He found a back door, pushed through it, and found himself in an alley behind the store. He didn't have a plan. He just knew he had to run, had to get away from the creature. He ran through the alley, across several blocks, into a residential neighborhood. He was completely lost now, in areas of Quezon City he'd never been before. But at least there were houses, people, lights. The Tikbalang wouldn't risk being seen in a populated area, surely. That's what Marco hoped, anyway. He stumbled into a small all-night sari-sari store and asked the elderly woman working there if he could use her phone. She could see he was in distress and didn't ask questions. Marco called a taxi from a company he knew, gave them his location, and waited inside the store. The taxi arrived 20 minutes later. Marco got in, gave the driver his home address in a different part of Quezon City, and finally collapsed back in the seat. He didn't see the Tikbalang again, not that night anyway. But here's where the story gets worse. Marco quit his job the next day. He couldn't explain why to his employers. They just saw a decade of reliable service end abruptly. No notice, no explanation. He spent the next 2 weeks barely leaving his house, afraid to go out after dark. But then, strange things started happening at his home. He'd hear hoofbeats on the street outside, even though there were no horses in his neighborhood. He'd wake up at night to find his bedroom window open, even though he distinctly remembered locking it. Once, he found a hoof print on his kitchen tiles in the morning. Just one, isolated print, burned into the tile as if made by something impossibly hot. Worst of all, he started seeing the creature in his dreams. Every night, the same nightmare. The Tikbalang standing at the foot of his bed, those red eyes staring at him, growing closer, closer, until he'd wake up gasping. A friend eventually convinced Marco to speak with an albularyo, a Filipino folk healer. The albularyo listened to his story and told him something that chilled Marco to his core. "You've been marked," the albularyo said. "The Tikbalang doesn't just hunt people. It hunts people it's chosen. You're not the first person it's marked, and if you don't do something about it, you never will be free." The albulario recommended a ritual: salt around the house, blessed candles, prayers to saints and protective spirits. Marco did everything the albulario suggested, and slowly, the visitations stopped. The hoofbeats ceased. The dreams faded. But Marco never drives at night anymore. He works a day job now, and he refuses to drive on roads outside the main urban areas. And sometimes, he says, on certain nights, when he hears a horse neigh or a car honk that sounds vaguely like the Tikbalang's terrible scream, he feels that old fear returning. A fear that someday, the creature might come looking for him again. Sleep deprivation and stress can cause hallucinations, particularly in drivers working night shifts. The human brain, when frightened, tends to misinterpret ordinary stimuli. A motorcycle following at a distance could appear to be a supernatural creature, especially after the mind has been primed by folklore and cultural beliefs. The creatures in the mirror and the unusual experiences after the incident could be explained by post-traumatic stress disorder, where the brain reinterprets normal stimuli as threatening. Additionally, the convenience store clerk's account, had Marco been interviewed, might have provided a very different explanation for what actually occurred. However, Marco's experience was never formally investigated or documented, and his testimony remains consistent over the years. So far, we've seen the Tikbalang as a territorial guardian, a creature that attacks those who violate sacred lands. But Filipino folklore tells of another aspect of the Tikbalang that's equally terrifying: its ability to lure humans into supernatural traps. Our next story comes from a bachelor party in Calamba, Laguna, where a group of men discovered that one wrong turn could lead to an encounter with a creature far more sinister than they ever imagined. In December 2017, a group of 7 men from Manila organized a bachelor party in Calamba, Laguna, a town about an hour south of the capital. The groom, let's call him Anthony, was marrying his girlfriend in 2 weeks, and his friends wanted to give him a memorable final night of bachelorhood. They rented a van, packed beer and food, and planned to spend the evening at local bars and entertainment venues. One of the men, Richard, who I spoke with directly about this incident, had lived in Calamba for several years and claimed to know all the best spots. So around 8 p.m., the group piled into the van, and Richard directed the driver to what he called the most exclusive club in town. The driver, following Richard's directions, drove deeper into the outskirts of Calamba, away from the main commercial areas and into more rural, less developed territory. The buildings became older, more spaced out, with longer stretches of darkness between them. The roads were less maintained, filled with potholes. "Are you sure this is the right way?" the driver asked, concerned. Richard insisted it was. "Trust me," he said. "It's down this road." What many don't realize about the Tikbalang is that it's not purely a mindless predator. In Filipino folklore, the Tikbalang is an intelligent being, capable of complex plans and deceptions. One of the most common Tikbalang legends involves the creature taking the form of an attractive person, a beautiful woman or a handsome man, to lure unsuspecting travelers off the road and into isolated areas where the creature can reveal its true nature. The creature is said to have a particular affinity for groups of men, especially those who are intoxicated or distracted. It will appear as a woman, flirt with one of the men, lead him away from the group, and then reveal itself in its true form. The Tikbalang feeds on fear, on terror, and it particularly enjoys playing with its prey before striking. This seduction is not random. The Tikbalang can sense if someone is wicked or disrespectful, and it targets those individuals specifically. The creature is said to be a keeper of moral boundaries in a way, punishing those who are lecherous, cruel, or disrespectful to women. After driving for about 15 minutes down increasingly rural roads, The group noticed something odd. The surrounding area looked abandoned. The buildings they passed were old, dilapidated, many boarded up. There were no people, no other vehicles, no signs of life. "Maybe we should turn back," one of the men suggested, but Richard insisted they were close. He was certain the club was nearby. Then they saw the lights. Ahead, through the darkness, there was the glow of neon signs and the sound of music, bass pulsing, the kind of sound you'd hear at a nightclub. The driver pulled over in front of what appeared to be a building, though in the darkness it was hard to make out exactly what kind of structure it was. The exterior wasn't particularly impressive. A faded sign above the door that was too dark to read clearly, blackened windows, no indication of what was inside. But the music and lights were coming from within, and several of the men were eager to go inside, especially Anthony, who was ready to party. They entered through a heavy wooden door. Inside, the club was surprisingly nice. Dim lighting, a polished dance floor, a bar along one wall, and surprisingly, quite a few people. There were other men scattered around and several women in the club as well. Some appeared to be working there. Some appeared to be customers. Richard ordered drinks, and the group found a table near the dance floor. The music was loud, the atmosphere was energetic, and for a moment, the group forgot about how strange it was that they hadn't seen this place before or heard about it from other locals. That's when the most beautiful woman walked past their table. She was stunning, long dark hair, perfect features, wearing a red dress that seemed to glow in the club's lighting. When she made eye contact with Anthony, she smiled, a slow, knowing smile. Then she walked directly to their table and sat down next to him. "Happy bachelor party," she said, her voice like music. "Which one is getting married?" Anthony pointed at himself, entranced. The woman took his hand and led him onto the dance floor. Richard watched the woman and Anthony dancing and felt his stomach twist. There was something deeply wrong about the situation, though he couldn't articulate exactly what. He mentioned it to one of the other men, David, who was also having doubts. "I know every club in this area," Richard said quietly. "I've never heard of this place before. And look around," he gestured at the patrons. "No one is actually talking to each other. They're just existing." David nodded. Now that Richard had pointed it out, David noticed it too. Everyone in the club seemed to be moving in slow motion, dancing without enthusiasm, existing in the space without any genuine joy or engagement. It was like watching people move through a dream. "We should get Anthony out of here," David said. But when they looked back at the dance floor, Anthony and the woman were gone. Richard and David jumped up and rushed to where they'd been dancing, but there was no trace of them. The woman had vanished, and so had Anthony. "He must have gone to the bathroom or outside," one of the other men said, but Richard knew better. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. He grabbed David's arm. "We need to leave. Now. This place isn't what it seems." The group of 5 remaining men rushed toward the door, but when they tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. The door that had been easy to open when they entered was suddenly sealed shut, as if locked from the outside or barricaded somehow. Richard pounded on the door, shouting for someone to open it. The bartender didn't respond. The women didn't seem to notice. No one helped. Finally, after several minutes of frantic pounding, the door swung open, but when the men rushed out, they found themselves not on the road where they'd entered, but in a completely different location. They were on a dirt road surrounded by sugarcane fields with no sign of the club they'd just exited. The van was gone, the road was unfamiliar, and night had fallen completely. They had no sense of how much time had passed inside the club. The men tried to navigate their way out of the sugarcane fields, but every direction they went, the landscape looked the same. Endless rows of cane, darkness between them, and no clear direction. They could hear sounds echoing across the fields, music from the club, but distorted and warped, coming from multiple directions at once. They could also hear other sounds, hoofbeats, getting closer. The sound of something massive moving through the cane fields, crushing the plants beneath it. "Run," Richard said simply, and the four men bolted. They ran through the darkness, thorns and cane leaves cutting at their skin and clothes. The hoofbeats followed them, relentless, gaining closer with each passing minute. The sound of the Tikbalang's breathing became audible, heavy, rasping, excited. One of the men tripped and fell. For a moment, the others hesitated, torn between helping him and saving themselves. The decision was made for them when they heard a sound they'd never forget. The man screaming. And then the sound of something being struck with terrible force. The remaining men, Richard, David, and two others, burst out of the sugarcane fields and found themselves on a major road. They could see the lights of a town in the distance. They ran toward the lights, running on instinct and adrenaline, not caring about anything except distance. Behind them, the Tikbalang emerged from the cane fields. But instead of pursuing, the creature stopped at the boundary between the rural area and the town. It watched them run, its red eyes glowing in the darkness, and then it turned and vanished back into the fields. The four men made it to the road and flagged down a police jeepney. They were hysterical, bleeding from cuts and scratches, and absolutely incoherent. The police took them to a hospital where they received treatment for their injuries. Anthony was never found. Search parties scoured the Calamba area for days, questioning the men about the location of the club, but when they drove the men back to the area where they'd entered the club, there was nothing there. Just an empty field with no building, no structure of any kind. The location couldn't be identified. A few months later, Richard received an envelope in the mail. There was no return address, but inside was a photograph. It was a picture of Anthony, standing in the club they'd visited, dancing with the beautiful woman. But in the photograph, Anthony looked different. His skin was pale, his eyes were empty, and his smile was wrong, too wide and more bestial than human. He looked like he was no longer entirely himself. Richard destroyed the photograph, but he never forgot what he saw. To this day, he refuses to discuss what happened during the time they were inside the club, saying only that he's afraid that discussing it might draw the creature's attention again. The most terrifying part of this story is what happened 3 months later. One of the men in the group, let's call him Miguel, started experiencing strange dreams. In the dreams, he was in the club, and the beautiful woman was approaching him. When he'd wake up, there would be scratches on his body, as if someone had clawed at him in his sleep. 2 months after the dreams started, Miguel disappeared. His family reported him missing, but no trace of him was ever found. The police investigation concluded that he'd probably run away or met with foul play unrelated to the incident at the club. Richard and David both believe that Miguel was taken by the Tikbalang, that the creature had marked him that night and was collecting on that claim, drawing him back to the club and the creature's domain. To this day, neither man has returned to Calamba, and both refuse to speak in detail about what they experienced that night. Rational possibilities. Extreme stress and possibly roofied drinks could cause hallucinations and memory gaps. The club could have been a real but disreputable establishment, and Anthony could have left with the woman consensually. The group's panicked state and intoxication could explain their poor navigation and sense of being lost. The Tikbalang encounter could be a shared false memory implanted by suggestion and group psychology. Alternatively, The group could have experienced a severe reaction to some substance they ingested, causing hours to pass that felt like minutes, resulting in disorientation and confabulation. However, the existence of the photograph of Anthony in the club and the subsequent disappearances of both Anthony and Miguel remain unexplained by purely rational means. Before we wrap up, let me explain the genuine cultural and spiritual roots of the Tikbalang legend that make these stories feel so authentic to Filipino consciousness. The Tikbalang legend likely predates Spanish colonization, originating from the indigenous Filipino understanding of the relationship between humans and the natural world. Pre-Hispanic Philippines had a rich tradition of identifying powerful spirits associated with specific locations: mountains, forests, rivers, burial grounds. These spirits were believed to be territorial and protective of their domains. The arrival of Spanish Catholicism merged these indigenous beliefs with Christian demonology, resulting in creatures like the Tikbalang being understood as demonic entities. Despite being feared, the Tikbalang isn't simply evil in Filipino folklore. It's understood as a guardian, a protector of boundaries. The creature attacks those who show disrespect to sacred lands, who disturb burial grounds without proper ritual, or who are morally corrupt. This makes the Tikbalang something of a moral enforcer, a dark angel that punishes transgression. The horse element is particularly significant. In pre-Hispanic Philippines, horses were not native animals. They were introduced by Spanish colonizers. So the Tikbalang represents a merging of indigenous supernatural tradition with colonial trauma. It's a creature that embodies the violation of indigenous lands by outside forces. The grotesque human-horse hybrid can be seen as a symbol of colonization itself, the forced merger of incompatible forces resulting in something monstrous and unnatural. In contemporary Philippines, the Tikbalang has evolved to haunt not just ancient burial grounds, but modern highways, construction sites, and nightclubs. The creature has adapted to follow human civilization, remaining a guardian of moral and territorial boundaries, even as the landscape has changed around it. According to folklore, the red eyes are a manifestation of the creature's rage and its connection to realms beyond human understanding. Some traditions suggest the red glow is actually the eyes reflecting the fires of damnation or spiritual torment. Others claim the eyes represent the creature's ability to see both the physical world and the spirit realm simultaneously. The Tikbalang's ability to seduce and deceive humans speaks to Filipino cultural anxieties about moral weakness and moral transgression. The creature specifically targets those who are vulnerable to temptation, those who are unfaithful, lecherous, or morally compromised. This reflects a cultural belief that supernatural punishment follows moral transgression. Traditional Filipino methods to protect against Tikbalang encounters include carrying blessed items, rosaries, crucifixes, religious medallions, reciting prayers, especially to Mary and Jesus, respecting sacred sites and performing proper rituals before disturbing land, avoiding travel alone at night on isolated roads, not making sexual advances towards strangers of unknown origin, treating burial grounds and historical sites with reverence, making offerings of food and candles at sacred sites. The consistency across these protective measures suggests a deep cultural understanding that the Tikbalang responds to genuine respect and reverence for sacred boundaries. These stories share a common thread running through all of them: the violation of boundaries. Whether physical boundaries, sacred land, moral boundaries, disrespect, lewdness, greed, or spiritual boundaries, desecration of the dead. Each encounter with the Tikbalang followed someone crossing a line that shouldn't have been crossed. The Tikbalang exists in Filipino culture as a supernatural manifestation of consequences, the universe's way of enforcing respect for the sacred. The creature doesn't hunt randomly. It hunts those who have been disrespectful, those who have disturbed what should remain undisturbed, those who have violated territorial or moral boundaries. What makes the Tikbalang particularly terrifying compared to other supernatural entities in Asian folklore is its intelligence and agency. It's not trapped in a location like a ghost. It's not compelled by hunger like a vampire. The Tikbalang chooses when to reveal itself, how to hunt, and whether to show mercy. It's a creature of purpose and will. In modern Philippines, where development and globalization are rapidly changing the landscape and eroding traditional values, the Tikbalang legend has become even more resonant. As sacred sites are developed, as burial grounds are paved over, as traditional respect for the land fades, the Tikbalang seems to become more active, more aggressive, more visible. Is this because the creature is actually becoming more prevalent? Or is it because we're finally starting to notice the warnings that have always been there? What do you think happened in these encounters? Were they genuine paranormal experiences, the psychological manifestation of cultural beliefs, or something in between? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more true horror stories from across Asia, with a focus on the genuine folklore and cultural traditions that have shaped these terrifying legends for centuries. If you've had your own encounter with a Tikbalang or other Philippine supernatural creature, I encourage you to share your story. The Tikbalang legends live because people keep telling them, keep treating them with the respect they deserve, and keep warning others about the boundaries these creatures enforce. Stay safe, stay respectful of the sacred, and remember, not all legends are just stories. Some of them are warnings.